March of 1939. Adolf Hitler has just won his latest diplomatic victory from the appeasing Allies. Unlike other concessions, however, this latest conquest was not a slice of land or the lifting of a military restriction. Rather, it was about obtaining a seat on a commission that regulated the shipping of a river that Hitler had claimed was German. This river was the Danube, the watery artery that spanned the length of Central Europe from Bavaria to Romania. Longer than its somewhat more famous counterpart, the Rhine, the Danube has linked together Central Europe since the time of the Romans, and its very length meant that after Rome's empire had fallen, there were many states that bordered the watercourse. Each state, naturally, wanted its own slice of the traffic that sailed along this river, leading to a myriad of laws and taxes that sailors would have to navigate. Though this splintered status quo lasted for some time, things changed when a strong power decided to exert the ultimate control, that of where the Danube met the Black Sea. How did everyone else, people who lived on the river and those who traded on it, deal with this new dam of commerce? This is the story of the European Commission of the Danube. In 1828, Russia reached the Danube Delta for the first time. Fresh from their victory of the Ottoman Empire, they sought to capitalize on their conquests to dominate Black Sea trade. The Danube was the primary entrepot of Europe's heartland. However, after entering the river from the Black Sea, the Danube swung south and west, away from Russia's influence. So it became the policy of the Tsars to make it as inconvenient as possible for mariners to use the Danube, and steer trade towards them and their preferred port, Odessa, in today's Ukraine. According to British reports, who were by no means friendly to the Russians at this time, Russian authorities had built an entire network of quarantine stations along the Danube's mouth, and required mariners who wished to go up the Danube to wait 14 days in quarantine, which, admittedly, was not unlike other quarantine stations of the time, such as that between Austria and the Ottoman Empire. But where it was different was if sailors instead took their goods to Odessa, Russia's preferred port, quarantine times were instead only 4 days. Well, if the saving of 10 days on an already long trip was not enough to persuade a sailor, there was always the issue of Danube's difficult waterways. For centuries, silt and sediment had been filling up the end of the Danube River, raising shoals so high that, in some areas, ships were simply unable to pass. This necessitated transferring a ship's goods to shallow-drafted lighters, which could clear these shallow stretches, but these lighters didn't have the capacity of the larger ships, causing a time-consuming and costly loading and unloading. Merchants complained that these lighter pilots, largely Greeks, took advantage of them and were little better than pirates. Reports that up to 50% of the revenue of a shipment was taken by such extortions at the Danube's mouth. While upriver countries, largely the Ottoman and Austrian empires, were originally content with Russian control of the delta, they soon grew frustrated with the inefficiency of their own waterway. And while they had agricultural produce they wished to sell on world markets, industrializing nations like Britain and France wished to use the river the other way, exporting industrial goods to Europe's heartland. The riverine and shipping powers began grumbling for a change, but Russia refused to relax its grip on the Danube's mouth. It took a war to finally shake them off. In 1853, Russian troops advanced into the Ottoman provinces of Wallachia and Moldavia, predecessors to today's Romania, and kicked off the Crimean War. Unwilling to see Russia again expand at the expense of Turkey, France and Britain declared war on Russia, joining the Sultan against the Tsar. Though the anti-Russian coalition was on the whole successful, progress was slow and costly. It soon became the war aim of Britain and France to pry the Danube from Russia's grip, thereby opening Central Europe to their trade. Eventually, after a hard slog and the fall of Sevastopol and Crimea, peace was declared, and in 1856, the victorious coalition was able to finally bring Russia to the table over trade reform. In Paris, a peace conference was held, with the issue of the Danube being the very second point on the subsequent treaty. Diplomats from France, the United Kingdom, the Ottoman Empire, the Kingdom of Sardinia, Prussia, Austria, and the Russian Empire discussed various proposals for making the Danube a fair and free watercourse. Despite the whole of the Danube's outlet coming back under Ottoman control after Russian territorial losses in the war, the main shipping powers, Britain and France, feared that the Turks would be unable to maintain their river, leaving them in much as the same position as before. Though their new ally may reduce the tolls, there was still the issue of the river being almost unnavigatable to ocean-going ships. Therefore, it was decided that a commission would be set up for 2 years to study the river and figure out how to open it for trade. The common assumption was that all the river needed was a good dredging, and that it was only Russian ill will that this simple task had not been done. Therefore, the commission simply needed to find and perform the necessary work, and after its temporary mandate had expired, everyone could start trading on the river. And to give the commission the leeway needed to do its job, it was given sole authority on the Danube Delta, extending upriver to the Romanian town of Galatz. In an internationalist move that was rather novel at that time, the commission was not to be dominated by one nation or another, but instead, each of the signatory nations would have a representative on the commission, with issues being decided by majority vote. The commissioners were to work for the good of Danube navigation, and not for the national interests from where they had been sent. Thus, their decisions were to be made with impartiality and neutrality for the benefit of all. Thus, the European Commission of the Danube was established. Though the Danube appears to be a single line from beginning to end on most reasonably scaled maps of Europe, the truth is that, like most rivers, it has many meanders and splits. At the end of its long watercourse through the continent, the river divides into 3 main branches that flow into the Black Sea. The most north of these is the Kilia Canal, from which the Russians had been so recently pushed back. To the south of this is the Salina, the most generally straight of the watercourses, followed finally by the St. George Channel, which is the most south of them all. None of these channels were fit for navigation by normal shipping, and it was the job of the Commission to make just one of these available. The Commission was initially instructed to postpone development until a survey was complete by the Great Powers to determine which of these 3 branches was best for development. But since the Commission was already on the clock anyway, they decided to develop a branch on their own in the meantime. They chose the Salina, the middle watercourse, and projects soon commenced under the direction of an English engineer employed by the Commission. Despite the assertions of the Western powers that it was only Russian laziness that kept the Danube closed, it quickly became apparent to the Commission that the Danube needed more than a good dredging. Beyond the mere silt buildup, the waterways were filled with rapids and obstructions, ranging from rocks to partially sunken ships. The traditional Turkish method of mandating mariners to drag chains behind their boats to help dredge naturally, while better than nothing, was not effective enough on its own to open the waterway. Rather, it would take all the hydraulic expertise of the Commission experts to make the Danube navigable to the sea. But it would not be cheap, and it would not be quick. Granted another 2 years of jurisdiction to complete the works, the Commission's next struggle was how to raise money for the needed improvements. Initially, the dredging was paid for by loans from Turkey, whose land the delta was nominally in, but the Ottomans proved to be unreliable financiers. In 1860, a pivotal decision was made by the Commission, one that would put what had been a mere committee of transnational experts onto the path of nominal statehood. They would begin charging vessels tolls for sailing on the river. They had made navigation for these ships possible, why not tax them? It wasn't unlike a more modern gas tax to pay for road improvements today. Continuing to see the utility in the Commission, the Great Powers continued to renew the Commission's life, to the point where the commissioning of the Danube River looked like it was going to be there to stay. Throughout the 1860s and 70s, the Commission prospered, able to continue operation despite the wars of German unification then raging in Central Europe. In addition to charging its own tariffs, the Commission began to expand its legislative and judicial reach. Vessels traveling on the Danube Delta were subject to Commission laws, and upon breaking them, could be tried in Commission courts. The river had essentially been ceded from the land that bordered it and become its own country, complete with its own flag. This became a problem to those countries bordering its shores. In the 1880s, the map of Europe was beginning to change. When the Commission had been created, there was no Romania, but after the region broke away from the Turks, they began to see the Commission as a new form of imperialism on what they now claimed as a Romanian river. Tensions flared, and a routine conference to extend the authority of the Commission was boycotted by Romania, as well as Bulgaria, another newly, though nominally, independent state in which the Danube passed through. Still, despite outcries from Romanian nationalists, the Commission remained the authority on the river. For the Danube was not Romanian. It was a river that belonged to all Europe, and many felt that to give one power the control of its gates, like Russia once had, would be to the detriment of all who lived and traded along it. And the Commission was proving its worth. During the Commission's first 20 years of operation, there were 111 shipwrecks on the Danube Delta. However, between 1909 and 1929, there were only 5, an over 20-fold improvement. When World War I broke out in 1914, the transnational character of the Commission's directors was put under strain. Although the commissioners of France and Britain were now at war with the commissioners from Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Turkey, they behaved civilly enough during their meetings and continued to work together for the good of the Danube Delta. This was not the first war the Commission had weathered, and it seemed like it would do so again. Things changed in 1916 when Romania opportunistically declared war on Austria-Hungary in an attempt to seize territory from her beleaguered neighbor. Sensing opportunity for gain on water as well as land, Romania decided that it would take over Danube management from the Commission whose sovereignty predated its own. The Danube would truly become a Romanian river after all. Unfortunately for the Romanians, their surprise attack only led to a few weeks of minor success. Reinforced by her Central Power allies, a coalition of forces promptly crushed the Romanian armies in a matter of weeks, occupying the majority of a country with a speed that harkens more to a World War II blitzkrieg than the stereotype of plotting World War I trench warfare. The Danube Delta was in Central Power's hands. However, they did not attempt to replace the Commission. Instead, they tried to keep working within its frameworks, treating it more or less like a sovereign power rather than a scrap of paper. The Central Powers decided to change the makeup of the Commission to include only delegates from the countries that border the Danube directly: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania. A lineup that conveniently excluded their unconquered wartime enemies. Eventually, though, the Central Powers lost the war, and the Entente took their revenge by changing the makeup of the Commission of the Danube to their own roster: Britain, France, Italy, and a newly liberated and enlarged Romania. The river the Commissions governed was left a mess by the war, and much cleanup was needed. It was estimated in 1922 that the Danube only carried half of the goods it had pre-war, even with the expanded capacity of ships. Much of this was blamed on the squabbles of states that had emerged from the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, for what had once been a large duty-free zone now had border checkpoints in Romania, Yugoslavia, Hungary, Austria, and Czechoslovakia. These small states jealously guarded their own borders against each other, creating conflict over had once been a peaceful zone. Still though, the Commission operated beyond borders, doing its best to keep the river open and navigatable to all. As the 20s turned into the 30s, the Commission was lauded as a prime example of the new type of multinational organization that was supposed to keep Europe at peace, a sort of proto-League of Nations that preceded the revered body by 60 years. However, the Commission's greatest critic remained. Romania again campaigned to seize control of the river. It suggested that the Commission should only maintain its legislative power, while Romania would be able to start collecting its own tariffs. As this was exactly the kind of paid extortion the Commission was created to avoid, the other powers balked at Romania's attempt to nationalize the river. Romania took the Commission to the League of Nations court, as if the Commission were its own country. However, Romania lost on all counts, with the court even deciding to extend the Commission's sovereignty. Things finally changed for Romania and the world in 1939, when Nazi Germany, looking for the latest supposed enemy of its complete control over Central Europe, targeted the Commission. Proclaiming that internationally controlled rivers were unacceptable to the new Reich, Hitler achieved one last bit of appeasement from the Western powers, that the Danube Commission should be dissolved. Hitler declared the Danube a German river, despite controlling only its headwaters, and Romania finally received control of a delta in May of 1939 with the Sinaia Agreement. The Commission, which had done so much to improve the lives and livelihoods of those who lived and traded on it for 83 years, had finally disappeared. Remnants of this riverine state can still be seen, from the Salina Lighthouse to much of the architecture in its former capital of Galitz. It was the first experiment in multinational partnership for the common good, far predating both the League of Nations and the United Nations, and provided safer and cheaper travels to many living in Europe's heartland. Its legacy lives on today with a reformed commission that, according to its 1998 charter, is dedicated to preserving the environment around the Danube as well as its shipping. The legacy of cooperation that created a de facto country remains along Europe's river. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I know this one was a little bit longer than my usual fare, but I really appreciate you sticking through to the end. And hey, maybe you learned a little something about this river microstate. Let me know in the comments if you knew about this internationalized river, or if you have any similar landmarks in your area. I'm sure they have an interesting story.